The distress call came in on a frequency humanity hadn't used in 40 years. Commander Nadia Reyes heard it first. She was always the one who heard things first, a habit she'd developed in the cramped sonar rooms of the old Meridian-class patrol vessels, where the difference between a whale song and a torpedo was a half-second of attention. She pressed 2 fingers to her earpiece, the same unconscious gesture she'd had since the academy, and said nothing for 3 full seconds. The bridge of the Uns Bellamy waited. "It's old El-Orion encryption," she said. "Emergency ban, 2 ships." Captain Darren Voss stood up from his chair. He was not a man who stood up quickly, not anymore, not since the thing with his knee on Proxima Station, but he stood now. "How far?" 11 minutes at current speed. "Sir, there's something else on the scope. Something large." The Tesserine corridor had been quiet for the better part of a decade, which was why Starwatch had assigned the Bellamy to it. An aging Sentinel-class survey frigate, 4 years past her scheduled refit, carrying a crew of 61 and enough fuel for 8 more months of nothing. Voss had made his peace with the posting. He'd made his peace with a lot of things. His daughter's last message was still unread in his personal queue. He'd been composing a reply for 11 days. He crossed to Rhea's console and looked at the scope. 2 civilian transports in the grip of something the sensors couldn't fully resolve. A ribbon of energy that stretched across the corridor like a scar in space, amber and deep crimson, pulling at the ships the way a current pulls at leaves. The transports were El-Orion vessels, long-haul colony ships, and they were coming apart. "All ahead full," Voss said. "Signal those ships. Tell them we're coming." He knew, even as he said it, that full speed on the Bellamy meant something different than it had on younger ships. The engines answered with the particular reluctance of machinery that has been pushed too long past its limits. A low harmonic groan that traveled through the deck plating and up through the soles of Voss's boots. He knew that groan. He'd learned to read it the way old sailors read weather. They reached the first transport in 9 minutes. It was already breaking apart, structural integrity failing along the midline, hull sections peeling away in long curling strips. Reyes was running the transporter at capacity before Voss finished giving the order, and people were coming through in clusters. El-Orions in emergency suits, children, an old woman clutching a box of something she would not set down even during dematerialization. 43 people in 4 minutes. Then the transport folded in on itself and there was nothing left to save. The second ship was deeper in the ribbon's pull. "We can't match its drift and hold position," said Ensign Farrow from the helm. He was young, 23, 24, the kind of young that still believed competence was the same as control. "If we go in after it, we might not come out." "I know," Voss said. "Sir, I know, Farrow." He stood with his hands behind his back watching the scope. "But there are people on that ship." They went in. The Bellamy shuddered as the ribbon's gravitational effects took hold. Not the clean artificial gravity of normal space operations, but something older and stranger, a pulling sensation that had no single direction, that seemed to come from the geometry of space itself rather than any point source. Lights flickered. Someone on a lower deck swore loudly in Portuguese. Reyes ran the transporter hot, past rated tolerance, her hands moving across the panel with the precise efficiency of someone who has done the same calculation 1,000 times in her head, and is now simply executing it, not thinking, just doing. 31 more survivors. Then the second transport broke apart. "Get us out," Voss said. The Bellamy pulled clear, and the ribbon passed on through the corridor like a slow wound through the dark. Voss stood at the forward viewport for a long time after. Behind him, his crew was moving the survivors to medical, to crew quarters, to any space that could be made habitable. He could hear fragments of conversation, the low, steady tones of his medical officer, the occasional broken sound from someone who had just lost everything they'd ever owned to an energy phenomenon that had no name in any human catalog. He did not read his daughter's message that night. He sat at his console and wrote a report instead, precise and clinical, cataloging the event in the language of official record, and when he was done, he sat there for a while longer in the dark. The El-Orion survivors were not what he expected. He had worked with refugee populations before, had spent 8 months stationed on Kepler's Gate during the Breathali displacement, had seen what that kind of loss looked like on a person's face. These people were different. They were calm in a way that unsettled him. Not numb he could recognize. This was something else. The old woman who had refused to set down her box sat in the medical bay with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the wall with an expression that Voss could only describe as waiting. Her name, he learned, was Ilara Soth. She was the oldest of the survivors, though she did not look it, and she had been a healer on her homeworld before it was destroyed. He asked her that standard question, homeworld, species designation, next of kin for the registry, and she answered them all without looking away from the wall, and then she said, without any particular inflection, "You won't remember any of this." Voss set down his datapad. "I'm sorry? This moment, this kindness." She touched the edge of the box in her lap. "It will fade. You'll go back to your routines. The people you saved today will become an incident report." "That's a fairly dark view of things," Voss said. "I've had time to develop it." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were the deep amber of old wood, and there was something in them that made him feel the way he felt looking at old photographs. That faint, vertiginous sense of time compressed, years folded into a single image. "How long have you been running, Captain?" He wasn't sure what she meant. "Pardon. From the things you haven't dealt with." She said it without cruelty, the way a physician describes a wound. "You have the bearing of a man who has been in motion for so long that stopping terrifies him more than any enemy." He picked up his datapad again. He did not answer her, but he thought about what she said for a long time afterward. In the way you think about something someone says, when they have touched something, you have spent considerable effort not touching. The years moved the way years do, when you are busy enough not to count them. Voss made captain on the Meridian, then the Arjuna, then spent 4 years at Admiralty before they offered him the Cassander, and he accepted before the word "offered" had finished leaving the briefing officer's mouth. He needed to be moving. Ilarasoth had been right about that at least. He never saw her again. He thought about her, though, in the specific way he thought about certain encounters. Encounters that left a residue, a faint coloring on the glass, through which he viewed subsequent events. He thought about her on the day his daughter got married, which he attended by comlink from the other side of the transit corridor, because he was on station during the Caliban flare event. He thought about her when his crew found the remnant data buoy from the transport, Serenade, one of the Elorian ships destroyed in the ribbon, and in the buoy's corrupted memory core were fragments of personal logs, voices, images, ordinary things, a child describing a bird she'd seen, a man recording a birthday message he never sent. He thought about her on the day the Cassander intercepted the Vardock fleet at the edge of the Outer Rim, and he made the call that saved 11,000 colonists on Denali 4 and lost 7 of his own crew, and stood at their memorial service 2 weeks later and said the words that captains say at such services. Words that were true but inadequate. The way all language is inadequate for certain things. By the time he took command of the Horizon, he was 54 years old, and had spent more of his life aboard ships than on any planet. His hair had gone silver at the temples. His knee had been repaired 3 times, and would need a 4th repair he kept putting off. He still had the habit of pressing 2 fingers to his earpiece even when he wasn't wearing one. The Horizon was the finest ship he'd ever commanded. A Sovereign-class explorer, long-range, deep space, the kind of vessel that existed at the furthest edge of human reach. He had a crew of 412. His second-in-command was Commander Adrakesh, 12 years younger than him and twice as organized. A woman whose calm was not the waiting kind but the earned kind, the kind built from the same substance as the ship's hull. He was content, which he understood was not the same as happy, but was its own category of good. Then the Vardock came back, and everything changed. The Vardock continuance was not, as a civilization, evil. This was the part that the briefings kept emphasizing, as if humanity needed to be reminded that the species attempting to collapse stars was operating from a coherent internal logic. The continuance was old, far older than humanity, older than most of the civilizations in the Outer Rim catalog, and it had been born in catastrophe. Their home system had been annihilated by a stellar shockwave 4,000 years ago. The survivors had rebuilt, slowly, across generations, and in the process of rebuilding they had developed a theology around the thing that had nearly destroyed them. They called it the current. Humans called it the Tesserine ribbon. It was the same phenomenon, the same energy anomaly that Voss had watched swallow 2 ships when he was a young commander on an aging frigate. The same amber light that had pulled at the Bellamy's hull and left 74 Elorian survivors to fill his medical bay and his quarters and his thoughts for years afterward. To the Vardock, the current was not a natural phenomenon. It was a gateway, a passage to a state of existence outside time, outside loss, outside grief, outside the long relentless wearing down of living. Their theologians called it the eternal still. Their scientists, who did not disagree with the theologians, but described things in different language, called it a temporal causality suspension zone. What it was, in practice, was a region of spacetime where the normal rules ceased to apply, where you could, apparently, exist in a state of perfect subjective experience, unchanged, unchallenged forever. And to reach it, to steer it close enough to a fixed point that you could enter on your own terms, rather than being swept in by accident, you needed to alter its path, which required destroying stars, which required the deaths of every living thing in every system whose sun you chose to collapse. The Vardak were not evil, they were grieving. They had been grieving for 4,000 years, and the grief had curdled into something that looked, from the outside, exactly like evil. They've destroyed 3 systems, Kesh said, at the briefing table. Around her were the department heads, and around them were the maps, and on the maps were the projected trajectory adjustments. Each successful stellar collapse marked with a quiet symbol that did not capture anything about what that symbol meant. We believe they're targeting the Viridian system next. Population of Viridian 3, 230 million. Voss looked at the maps. How long, he said. 72 hours to the next launch window. He pressed 2 fingers to the place where his earpiece would be if he were wearing one. Old habit. Ilara Soth had called it running. He had never stopped running, but he had learned, over the years, to run toward things rather than away from them. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that distinction was enough. What do we have in the system? The Horizon and 3 escort frigates. Vardak have a full battle group, 11 ships, plus their science vessel, the one carrying the implosion device. The silence in the briefing room was the particular silence of people who understand the arithmetic. Then we work the problem, Voss said. The Vardak leader was called the Synthesis, a position rather than a name, though after a while it became difficult to tell the difference. The Synthesis had been in its role for 60 years, which was by human reckoning most of a long life, though Vardak lived longer than humans did and measured time differently. Synthesis Voradamine was the being responsible for the death of 3 stellar systems. It was also, according to the intelligence reports Voss had read, a being who had lost every person it had ever loved in a single afternoon 62 years ago, when the world of the Vardak outer settlement was destroyed by a spatial anomaly that human scientists would later determine was an aftershock of the Tesserine Ribbon's gravitational wake. Voss thought about this. He thought about it while his tactical officers planned interdiction strategies, and his engineers calculated shield harmonics, and his communications team tried, repeatedly, to establish a channel to the Vardak fleet, and was refused repeatedly by the automated response system that said, in 11 languages including 2 human ones, that the continuance was not accepting mediation at this time. He thought about it while he read the intelligence profile of Voradamine, which included, tucked near the bottom, almost an afterthought, a notation that the Synthesis had, before the destruction of the outer settlement, been a composer of some distinction. Music that was, according to the analyst's dry summary, characterized by complex harmonic structures, and a recurring motif described as the persistence of small warmth against large cold. He thought about his daughter's wedding, the message he'd sent instead of attending. He still remembered the specific quality of her silence on the recording she'd sent back. Not angry, just the silence of someone who has stopped being surprised. Open a channel, he said, not to the communications team but to himself in the dark of his ready room at 0300. Then louder, open a channel. Sir? To the Synthesis. Direct. My personal frequency. Put it out on loop until they answer. Kesh appeared in the doorway of the ready room, still dressed, which meant she hadn't slept either. What are you going to say? I don't know yet. He picked up the small stone on his desk, a piece of granite from his daughter's garden, sent with a card that said something to hold on to when you need it, and turned it in his fingers. I'm going to tell them what I know. The Synthesis answered 40 minutes later. Its voice through the comm was a harmonic structure that the universal translator processed into something approximately human, but couldn't fully flatten. There were undertones, resonances, layers beneath the layers, the way certain music has qualities you can feel in your chest before you can name them. You are one of the small-lived, Voradamine said. It was not an insult. It was the Vardak equivalent of a species designation. Why do you persist in contacting me? Because I was there, Voss said. In the Tesserine corridor, 41 years ago, I pulled your people out of the ribbon. A silence that felt geological. You are not possible, the Synthesis said. I was commander of the Uns Bellamy. We saved 74 Elorian survivors. I don't know if they were your people, or just people who'd also been touched by the ribbon, But they were people, and I pulled them out. He held the granite stone. And one of them told me something I've been thinking about ever since. What? She said I was running, that I was moving so fast that I couldn't feel what I'd lost. He paused. She said this moment the rescue, the kindness would fade, that I'd turn it into a report and move on, and did you? Yes. He set the stone down. But it didn't disappear. It just went underground. The things you don't deal with don't go away. They find other shapes. The synthesis did not respond for a long time. Voss could hear faintly the sound of the Vardak battle group on his tactical display. The quiet digital tones of 11 ships holding position, waiting. 230 million people, Voss said. On Viridian 3, they don't know you exist. Most of them are asleep right now. Children. People having ordinary evenings. People who've been putting off conversations they mean to have. Their suffering in the current will end. They're not suffering. They're living. He picked up the stone again. He couldn't help it. His hands needed something to hold. The current, everything I've read about it, everything the Elorian survivors described to me. It's not living. It's stasis. It's the feeling of living without the cost. And I think you know that. I think that's why you're still trying to reach it. Because you lost your family in a moment, and the one thing that grief will not let you accept is that they were real, and now they're not. The current doesn't fix that. It just freezes you at the moment before you have to accept it. Another silence. Longer. You do not know what you're speaking about, the synthesis said, but the undertones had changed. Voss couldn't name what he was hearing. He'd listened to a lot of voices over 50 years, and he thought he was hearing something that lived adjacent to grief and adjacent to rage, and was, underneath both of those, the oldest sound a living being can make. I don't know how to stop. No, Voss said. I don't, but I know what 40 years of running feels like, and I know it doesn't end where you think it does. The fleet held position for 19 hours. During those hours, the Horizon's crew performed a series of maintenance tasks, tactical readiness drills, and the kind of small ordinary human activities that ship life accumulates like sediment. A bad coffee, worse jokes, a birthday in the engineering bay involving a cake made from reconstituted provisions that tasted approximately like cardboard dusted with sugar and was eaten with tremendous enthusiasm. Voss attended for 11 minutes and ate a piece, and listened to Ensign Pharaoh, not the original Pharaoh, but a different Pharaoh, his daughter, which was the kind of thing that happened when you stayed in the service long enough. Tell a story about the time she'd miscalculated a jump approach and deposited the Horizon in the middle of a Kalahari trade convoy. And everyone had laughed, and Voss had laughed, and it was the laugh of a man who has started to understand that the small warmths are not consolation prizes, but the actual point. He went back to the bridge and waited. At hour 19, the Vardak battle group began to withdraw. Not fully, not a retreat exactly. The science vessel, the one carrying the implosion device, held its position at the edge of the system, and 3 of the 11 warships remained. But the rest withdrew to a distance that the tactical display flagged as non-threatening. Then a single communication, the synthesis. I require confirmation, it said, that you were there, in the Tesserine corridor. Voss pulled the incident report from the Bellamy, the report he had written that night, precise and clinical, in the language of official record, the language that made everything manageable. He transmitted it, the original file, date-stamped, unredacted. Silence then, I lost a daughter, on the outer settlement. She was 12 years old. The harmonic undertones were bare now, stripped of the formal register. I have been trying to reach her for 60 years. Voss said nothing. He had learned, over 50 years, when to speak and when to let silence do the work. The current, the synthesis said. I know what it is. I have always known. Our theologians call it eternal. Our scientists call it suspension. I call it a pause. A harmonic shift. I call it the place where I do not have to be without her. I know, Voss said. How? Because I spent 11 days composing a reply to a message from my daughter before I got the boarding call for this assignment. And she was right here, on the same planet, and I still couldn't manage to just... He stopped. His voice had done something he hadn't entirely authorized it to do. He started again, quieter. Because I know what it's like to want to be somewhere that the loss hasn't happened yet. Except there's nowhere like that. There's only here. The long silence of space. 230 million, the synthesis said. Yes, I will stand down the device. I cannot speak for the continuance's larger council. I cannot undo what has been done to 3 systems. The voice was even now, the way a person's voice goes even when they have made a decision that costs them something they've been holding for a very long time. but I will stand down the device. The science vessel powered down its charge array at 0614 Horizon ship time. On the bridge, no one cheered. Voss had found, over the years, that when something truly difficult resolved, the instinct to cheer was replaced by something more complex. A release of breath, a sitting back, the specific physical sensation of tension, leaving a body that had forgotten it was carrying it. Kesh looked at him across the bridge with an expression that said several things at once, and he nodded back at her, and that was enough. What came next was not the end of the problem. The synthesis was one voice among many in the Vardak continuance. The 3 destroyed systems would need years of documentation, diplomacy, reckoning. The 230 million people on Viridian 3 would never know how close they had come to not existing at all. The memorial for the 3 systems was not yet built. It might never be built adequately. But the device was standing down, and the moment that followed the standing down was a moment worth noting. Voss sat in his chair and thought about his daughter. He pulled up the message on his personal console, the one he'd been composing a reply to for 11 days. He reread it. She'd written about her garden, about the granite in the soil, about a conversation she'd had with her own daughter, about what Grandpa did all day out there between the stars. Her daughter had apparently concluded that Grandpa was catching them, catching stars and putting them somewhere safe. He started writing a reply. Not a good reply, not a complete one. He'd been away too long to close the distance in a message, and he knew it, and he thought she probably knew it too. But a real one. A reply that acknowledged the gap without pretending it didn't exist. That said, I'm not done yet, and I know that costs something, and I'm sorry for the cost, and I'm coming home when this is over. He sent it before he could revise it into nothing. The reckoning came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the synthesis stood down the device, a faction within the Vardak continuance launched an operation independent of Vor Adamine, a secondary science team, loyal to the older order, who had anticipated the synthesis's hesitation and prepared for it. They were not the main fleet. They did not have the primary implosion device. But they had a secondary one, smaller, and they were already in the Viridian system, and they intended to use it. Voss got the alert at 0310 and was on the bridge in 90 seconds, still buttoning the collar of his uniform jacket. Where are they, he said. On the planet's surface. They landed during the diplomatic window. We were watching the fleet, not the surface. Kesh's voice had that quality it got when she was managing several difficult things simultaneously and doing it very well. We're reading one launcher, 3 Vardak operatives, shields up on their position. We can't get a transporter locked through the shields. Time to launch? 14 minutes. Maybe 12. Voss looked at the tactical display, the Horizon's shuttle bay, the distance to the surface, the math. Prep a shuttle, he said. Kesh looked at him. Nadia. Kesh, prep a shuttle. I need 3 people, volunteers. You're not one of them. Sir, with respect, you're in command if I don't come back. That's not a small thing. Don't argue it. He turned to the bridge. 20 people watching him. They'd all been awake since the alert. They had the particular look of people who have been waiting, not patiently but willingly, who have been holding themselves ready for the moment when someone asks something of them. I need 2 people who can work under fire and aren't claustrophobic, Voss said. The shuttle's going to get close to that shield before we do anything useful, and close is uncomfortable. 3 hands went up before he finished the sentence. He pointed to the 2 people whose hands had gone up first. Petty Officer Chen, who ran weapons systems and had an improbable gift for staying calm during explosions, and Ensign Tariq, who was 26 and absolutely should have been asleep and wasn't. Get your gear, Voss said. We go in 3 minutes. The shuttle broke atmosphere at dawn, local time on Viridian 3. Below them, through the viewport, was a landscape that had no idea what was about to happen to it. Ridges of reddish stone, a valley with something like trees, dawn light turning the whole thing, amber and deep crimson, in a way that struck Voss as almost unbearably ironic given the color of the ribbon. Beautiful. Just a planet being a planet, turning toward its star in the ordinary way, full of people doing ordinary morning things, none of whom knew that 3 Vardak operatives were on a hilltop 11 kilometers to the west, with a device that would collapse the sun. 9 minutes, Chen said. She had her targeting interface open on the secondary console, running calculations that Voss could follow only in outline. Their shield's directional, its strongest on the approach vectors from orbit. If we come in low and fast from the east, there's a gap at roughly 50 meters altitude. Define gap, Voss said. I can fit a shuttle through it if you're okay with maybe. Maybe works. Tariq was quiet in the co-pilot's seat. Voss glanced at him. "Firdaus, a mission like this?" Voss asked. "No, sir." Second, a pause. "First one ended badly. How badly?" "Ship took heavy damage. We lost 2 people." He said it the way young officers say such things, as a fact that still hasn't fully been absorbed, that sits just beneath the surface of ordinary speech. "I've been thinking about it since." "Good," Voss said, which was not the response Tariq expected. "Means you're paying attention. The ones who stop thinking about it are the ones who get careless." He pushed the shuttle lower, under the ridgeline, the hull almost skimming the reddish rock, the whole frame vibrating with the exertion of staying this fast at this altitude. His knee was telling him things he was ignoring. Below and to the left, the valley spread out in the early light, and ahead of them, cresting the ridge, was the hilltop where the launcher sat behind its shield wall. "Shield gap in 5 seconds," Chen said. Voss pushed the throttle forward. The gap was real. It was also approximately the width of a shuttle, and they went through it at a speed that made the hull scream in protest. And then they were inside the shield perimeter, 30 meters above the hilltop, with the launcher visible through the viewport, and 3 Vardock operatives looking up at them, with what even alien body language unmistakably communicated as surprise. The shuttle touched down hard. Voss was out the door before the landing struts had fully settled, moving across the hilltop with the rolling gait of a man who has not sprinted in several years, and is doing it anyway, because the launch window was 7 minutes away. And the operatives had recovered from their surprise with the speed of beings who had anticipated resistance and trained for it. What followed was not elegant. It was not the kind of engagement that gets reconstructed in tactical simulations, with clean vectors and optimal positioning. It was a hilltop fight at dawn on a planet that didn't know it existed, with 3 humans and 3 Vardock operatives, and a launcher that needed to be disabled before the window opened. And the principal advantage humanity had was the one it had always had. We were there when we weren't supposed to be, doing something we had no business doing, and we were not stopping. Chen took the first operative's weapon away, using a technique that her instructor at the academy would have described as unorthodox and effective in that order. Tariq, who was 26, and had been thinking about the last time he'd been in a situation like this, kept the second operative occupied with the focused intensity of someone who has decided privately that this particular thing is not going to go the way the last one did. Voss reached the launcher. He'd been briefed on Vardock technology. Not thoroughly, not the way an engineer would need to be briefed, with schematics and access protocols, but enough. The mechanism had 2 primary systems: the targeting array, which steered the implosion trajectory, and the initiator, which triggered the collapse. You could disable the launch by locking the targeting array. A locked array would cause the initiator's energy to reflect back through the mechanism and burn itself out, his briefing officer had said. Spectacular. Also, you'd want to not be standing immediately behind it when it does. He worked the panel. His hands were not shaking, which surprised him. He thought they should be shaking. The Vardock operative who had gotten past Chen reached him with 40 seconds to the launch window. It grabbed his arm. It was significantly larger than a human, and its grip was not metaphorical. Voss's datapad went one way and 3 of his fingers went numb, and he turned and looked at the operative, and saw in the alien eyes, compound, ringed in the same amber as the ribbon, something he recognized. Not the grief. Something beneath the grief. The thing beneath the grief that had sent this faction here in the first place, that had decided the synthesis had gone soft, and the mission was too important to stop. Certainty. The certainty of people who have decided that their loss justifies anything. He'd seen it in human eyes, too. "You can't bring her back," said. He didn't know if the operative had a her. He didn't know if the universal translator was working at this range. He said it anyway. "Whatever you're doing this for, you can't bring them back this way. You just take more people away from their children." 20 seconds. The grip didn't loosen, but something shifted in the compound eyes. 15 seconds. Chen was there. She came in fast from the operative's right, and the grip broke, and Voss turned back to the panel and his hands were shaking. Now, finally, as though they'd been waiting for permission. And he worked the lock sequence and engaged the reflective seal, and stepped back, because the briefing had been very clear about the stepping back. The launcher made a sound like a held note played on an instrument no one had built. A harmonic convergence that rose in pitch until it passed beyond hearing, and then silence. The mechanism was a ruin. The hilltop was intact. Viridian, the third sun, was intact. Rising amber in the east, doing the ordinary reliable thing it had done every morning for 5 billion years. Voss sat down on a rock. His knee was saying things that were going to require a medical conversation he had been putting off, and he let it say them, and looked out at the valley below the ridge, and thought, 230 million. They were down there, having breakfast, waking children, arguing about small things, carrying their ordinary griefs and ordinary joys in the ordinary way, without knowing. He pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. Horizon, this is Voss. Launcher disabled. 3 operatives in custody. We're going to need a medical team for Ensign Tariq and also for my knee. A pause. Get a signal to the synthesis. Tell them it's over. Kesh met him at the shuttle bay when they got back. She looked at his knee and at his face, and did not ask which one was worse, which he appreciated. Message from your daughter, she said. Came in an hour ago. He took the datapad. Read it standing there in the shuttle bay, with the smell of re-entry heat still on his jacket. His daughter had written, I told her you catch stars and put them somewhere safe. She wants to know if you'll teach her how. I want to know if you're actually coming home this time, or if home is just a place you pass through. He stood there for a while. Then he wrote back, I'm coming home, not passing through, staying. I'll teach her whatever she wants to learn, including the star thing, which is a slight exaggeration of my actual job, but close enough. He sent it. Then he looked up at Kesh, who was watching him with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular to happen, and is trying not to look like that. Debrief in an hour, he said. After that I'm filing the retirement paperwork. Kesh blinked. I've been putting it off, Voss said. Like a lot of things. He handed her the datapad and walked toward the turbolift, and behind him the horizon hummed with 412 people going about the business of being alive. And the stars outside were exactly where they had always been. Ordinary and various and persistent, in the way that things persist when nothing is trying to move them. He would come back to them eventually. He always did. But first he was going home. He pressed 2 fingers to his jaw. Habit of 40 years, the ghost of an earpiece that wasn't there. And then, deliberately, he put his hand down. Some habits you keep. Some you set aside when you've learned what they were for. The turbolift doors opened. He stepped through.